What if the reason people do not respect you has nothing to do with your intelligence, your effort, or your potential? What if the real reason is the way you show up every single day without even noticing it? You can work harder than everyone around you. You can be more capable, more prepared, more disciplined, and still be overlooked. Not because you lack value, but because you are sending a signal that speaks before you do. A quiet signal. A signal people feel in your tone, your posture, your hesitation, your need to explain, and your willingness to adjust yourself just to keep everything comfortable. At Stoicism Breath, this is one of the most important lessons from Stoic wisdom. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that you have power over your mind, not outside events. But many people give that power away the moment they walk into a room. They adjust, they explain, they seek approval, they hesitate, and without realizing it, they teach others how to treat them. Respect is not given simply because you deserve it. Respect is often a reaction to how firmly you stand in who you are. Most people think they are being overlooked because they are not talented enough or not impressive enough. But often they are being overlooked because they are unconsciously showing others that their position is flexible, their boundaries are weak, and their voice can be negotiated. And the difficult part is that this does not happen in obvious ways. It happens in small moments. The way you speak, the way you react, the way you soften your truth to avoid discomfort, the way you say yes too quickly, the way you explain yourself before anyone even challenges you, the way you adjust yourself so the room feels easier. There was a time when I believed being easy to work with would earn respect. I said yes quickly. I avoided tension. I explained myself so people would understand my intentions. I thought if I was clear enough, helpful enough, agreeable enough, people would trust me more. But the opposite happened. The more I tried to make everyone comfortable, the less weight my words carried. People listened, but they did not take me seriously. They nodded, but they did not follow. They included me, but they did not look to me when direction was needed. And for a long time, I could not understand why. The truth was uncomfortable. When you constantly adapt yourself to avoid friction, you slowly remove the very things that create respect. You remove certainty. You remove boundaries. You remove the sense that you are grounded in something solid. What remains is someone agreeable, but not authoritative. Someone present, but not impactful. Someone liked, but not truly respected. And people can feel that even when they cannot explain it. Marcus Aurelius never tried to be liked by everyone around him. He understood that approval is unstable. It changes with opinions, moods, and circumstances. If you build your behavior around approval, your behavior becomes unstable too. One day, you are confident because people agree with you. The next day, you are uncertain because someone questions you. That is not strength. That is dependence. Marcus reminded himself to act according to reason, not reaction, not emotion, not pressure, not the need to be accepted. And this is where many people lose their strength. Not in failure, not in weakness, but in the quiet habit of adjusting themselves to fit what others expect. Think about your own behavior for a moment. How often do you soften your opinion before you speak? How often do you add extra words just to make sure no one feels uncomfortable? How often do you hesitate before saying no even when you already know the answer should be no? How often do you stay quiet when something inside you knows you should speak? These moments may feel small, but they accumulate, and over time, they send a clear message. This person is not fully certain. This person can be moved. This person is negotiable. Respect begins to disappear the moment you start negotiating your own position. Not loudly, not dramatically, but through repeated subtle shifts. You agree when you should question. You explain when you should decide. You stay silent when you should speak. And each time you do that, you move a little further away from yourself. The world does not always need to push you down. Sometimes you are already lowering yourself. I had to learn this the hard way. There were conversations where I walked away knowing I had something valuable to say, but chose not to say it. There were moments where I accepted things that did not match my standards just to avoid tension. There were times I said yes with my mouth, while something inside me had already said no. And every time there was a cost, not only externally but internally. Because when you repeatedly ignore your own judgment, you begin to trust yourself less. And when self-trust weakens, everything else follows. Your voice becomes softer. your decisions become slower, your boundaries become easier to cross, and your presence loses weight. Marcus Aurelius wrote for himself not to impress others, but to stay aligned. He understood that the real discipline is internal. It is not about controlling people. It is about controlling how you show up regardless of the situation. That is where real strength comes from, not from dominance, not from aggression, not from trying to appear powerful, but from consistency between what you believe and how you act. The shift begins when you stop asking how can I be liked and start asking how can I stay aligned. Aligned with your values. Aligned with your standards. Aligned with your decisions. This does not mean becoming rigid, cold, or difficult. It means becoming clear. Clear about what you stand for. Clear about what you do not tolerate. Clear about what deserves your energy. Clear about what does not. Because clarity changes the way people experience you. People do not respect you simply because you try harder. They respect you when they sense that you are no longer moving unnecessarily. They respect you when you stop adjusting every time the room changes. They respect you when you stop sacrificing your own position just to keep everyone else comfortable. And in that stillness something becomes visible. You are grounded. You are not easily shifted. You are not easily influenced. You are no longer asking the world for permission to stand in your own value. That is where respect begins. They respect you when you stop moving unnecessarily, when you stop adjusting every time the environment changes, and when you stop chasing comfort at the cost of your own position. At Stoicism Breath, this is where everything begins to shift. Because in that stillness something powerful becomes visible. You are no longer easily influenced. You are no longer reacting to every signal around you. You are grounded. And that is what most people are missing. Not more effort, not more talent, not more preparation, but a stable center. A place inside you that does not move every time the world does. And until you build that center, no amount of external improvement will fully translate into respect. Because respect is not just about what you do. It is about what people feel when they interact with you. And what they feel is shaped long before you try to prove anything. It is shaped by your tone, your presence, your certainty, your pace. It is shaped by the signals you send without even realizing it. Now here is where most people get it wrong. They believe that if they explain themselves clearly enough they will be understood. And if they are understood they will be respected. It sounds logical. But in reality, it often creates the opposite effect. Because the more you explain, the more you signal that your position is uncertain. And uncertainty changes how people perceive you instantly. Not because your ideas are weak, but because your delivery suggests doubt. I used to believe that explaining everything was a strength. I would walk people through every detail. I would justify every decision. I would add more context just to make sure nothing could be misunderstood. In my mind, I was being thorough, responsible, clear. But over time, I started to notice something I could not ignore. The more I explained, the less seriously people took my decisions. Conversations became longer. People questioned more. And I found myself trying harder and harder to prove that I was right. It became a loop. Explain more, feel less confident, explain even more. But the real problem was never the information. It was the energy behind it. Because when you over-explain, you are not just sharing facts. You are revealing something deeper. You are revealing your need to be accepted. And people can feel that immediately. They hear it in your tone. They see it in your pace. They notice it in the extra sentences that were never necessary. Instead of sounding clear, you start to sound like you are asking for agreement. And the moment you seek agreement, you lose authority. Marcus Aurelius understood something most people overlook. There is a difference between speaking to express and speaking to defend. When you speak to express, you are grounded. You say what is true, and you let it stand. When you speak to defend, you are reacting. You are trying to protect your image, your position, your value. And that changes everything. Marcus did not write long arguments to justify every thought. He reminded himself of what was true, and then he acted accordingly. There is a quiet finality in that approach. It is not arrogance. It is alignment. When you are aligned with your reasoning, you do not feel the need to convince everyone around you. Now think about your own behavior. When do you feel the strongest urge to explain yourself? It is usually when you feel challenged, misunderstood, or judged. In that moment, your instinct is to fill the silence quickly. to make sure the other person understands you, to protect your position before it is questioned further. But that is exactly where most people lose control, because speed becomes your enemy. The faster you speak, the more you react. And the more you react, the more you reveal that something inside you is unsettled. Now imagine the opposite. Someone is questioned. Instead of reacting immediately, they pause. They listen fully. They take a moment before responding. And when they speak, it is simple, clear, and direct. No extra words. No unnecessary defense. No urgency to be validated. They state their decision, acknowledge the other perspective, and move forward. That kind of communication carries weight, not because it is louder, but because it is grounded, because it shows control, because it shows certainty. Over-explaining is often rooted in fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being wrong. Fear of losing approval. And when that fear drives your communication, you create the exact outcome you were trying to avoid. People sense the instability. And instead of trusting your judgment, they begin to question it more. Not because they want to challenge you, but because your behavior invites it. So the shift is simple but powerful. You do not need to say more. You need to say what matters and let it stand. You do not need to convince everyone. You need to be aligned with your own reasoning. Because the moment your words come from certainty instead of fear, everything changes. Your presence changes. Your communication changes. And most importantly, how people respond to you changes. There is an important distinction most people never stop to consider, and once you see it, your entire way of communicating begins to change. Clarity is not the same as over-explaining. They may look similar on the surface, but they create completely different results. Clarity is direct, structured, and intentional. It gives exactly what is needed and nothing more. It respects both your time and the other person's attention. Over-explaining, on the other hand, is scattered, defensive, and excessive. It tries to cover every possible angle in the hope of removing doubt, but instead it creates more of it. At Stoicism Breath, this is where many people unknowingly lose their presence. Because when you over-explain, you are not just sharing information. You are signaling uncertainty. You are showing that you are not fully grounded in what you are saying. And people can feel that even if they cannot explain why. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself not to waste energy on what is unnecessary. And that principle applies directly to how you speak. Not every thought needs to be expressed. Not every detail needs to be shared. Not every disagreement needs to be resolved immediately. Once you understand this, something shifts inside you. You begin to conserve your energy. You begin to choose your words more carefully. Not to control others, but to maintain your own clarity. Now here is where the real work begins. The next time you feel the urge to explain more, pause for a moment. Ask yourself a simple question. Is what I am about to say adding value, or is it protecting my image? That question changes everything. Because if the answer is that you are trying to protect how you are perceived, then what you are about to say is probably unnecessary. And in that moment, the strongest move is not to say more. It is to say what matters and then stop. Allow space. Let your words stand on their own without immediately reinforcing them. That space may feel uncomfortable at first, but that is exactly where respect begins to grow. Because when you stop trying to convince people of your worth, they start to feel it instead. They sense certainty instead of doubt. They sense control instead of urgency. And that changes how they respond to you. You do not need to explain everything to be understood. You need to be clear enough to be trusted. And trust is not built by how much you say. It is built by how confidently you allow what you say to stand without defense. Now most people believe respect is built through words. Through how well they speak, how impressive they sound, or how polished their ideas are. But that is only the surface. Words can create a strong first impression, but they do not sustain trust. What people truly pay attention to is your pattern. Not what you promise once, but what you consistently deliver over time. Because in the end, people do not trust your intentions. They trust your behavior. I learned this in a way that was not obvious at first. There was a time when I focused heavily on saying the right things. I communicated clearly. I expressed commitment. I presented myself as someone reliable. And at the beginning it worked. People responded well. Conversations felt smooth. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. But slowly something started to shift. not because of one big mistake, but because of small inconsistencies. A task delayed, a message I said I would send but forgot, a commitment pushed slightly beyond what I originally promised. Each moment felt small and easy to justify, but together they created something I could not see immediately, a gap between what I said and what I did, and people noticed the gap long before I did. This is the uncomfortable truth. Reliability is not judged in isolated moments. It is measured in patterns. Every time you follow through on what you said, you make a small deposit into trust. Every time you fall short, you make a withdrawal. And the difficult part is that withdrawals carry more weight than deposits. You can build trust slowly over time, but you can weaken it quickly through repeated inconsistency. That is why some people work hard, speak well, and still struggle to earn respect, because their actions do not consistently support their words. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He did not have the luxury of being inconsistent. His position required stability not just in decisions, but in character. He knew that people observe more than they listen. They watch how you respond under pressure. They notice how you behave when things are inconvenient. They see how you act when no one is forcing you to perform. And from those observations, they form a simple conclusion. Can this person be relied on or not? Think about the people you respect the most. Not the ones who impressed you once, but the ones you trust without hesitation. They are not perfect, but they are consistent. Their words match their actions. Their behavior does not change depending on the situation. There is a sense of stability around them, and that stability is what creates trust. So the real shift is not about speaking more clearly. It is about living more consistently, because in the end, respect is not built by what you say. It is built by what you repeatedly prove. They are predictable in the best possible way. Not boring, not rigid, but consistent. Their behavior does not shift depending on the room, the pressure, or the audience. They do not become one person in private and another in public. They show up prepared. They follow through. They take responsibility without hesitation. And because of that, there is a quiet stability around them. At Stoicism Breath, this is what true strength looks like. You do not have to guess which version of them you will encounter. There is no uncertainty, no confusion, no second guessing. And that certainty creates trust. Because trust is not built on what people say once. It is built on what they repeatedly demonstrate over time. Now here is something most people underestimate. You are being observed far more than you think. Not in an obvious way. Not in a constant conscious evaluation. But in small unnoticed moments. People are always collecting data. Instinctively, they are watching how you respond when things go wrong. They are noticing how you act when something becomes inconvenient. They are paying attention to whether your actions match your words. And without saying it out loud, they are asking one silent question. Can I rely on this person when it actually matters? That question is being answered every single day. Through your behavior. Through your consistency. Through the small decisions you make when no one is watching. You may think no one notices when you delay a task. When you slightly adjust a commitment. When you say you will do something but follow through later than you promised. But those moments matter, because they are signals. And over time, those signals form a pattern. And that pattern becomes your reputation. I once worked with someone who completely changed how I understood this. He was not the most talented person in the room. He was not the fastest thinker. Not the most creative. Not the most charismatic. On paper, there were others who seemed more impressive. But he had one quality that made him stand out more than anyone else. He did exactly what he said he would do, every single time. If he committed to something, it was done. If he promised a timeline, he met it. If a problem appeared, he did not disappear. He leaned in. He took ownership. He handled it. At first, people appreciated it. It felt refreshing, reliable. But over time, something deeper happened. People started to depend on it. They stopped questioning whether he would deliver. They stopped checking in. They stopped doubting. And eventually something shifted completely. He no longer had to prove himself. Trust had already been established. And once trust is established, respect follows naturally. This is what most people misunderstand. Respect is not built through intensity. It is not built through occasional bursts of performance. It is not built through moments of motivation or pressure. Anyone can perform well once. Anyone can show up strong for a short period of time. But that is not what creates credibility. Credibility is built in the ordinary moments, in the days when no one is watching, in the tasks that feel small and easy to ignore, in the promises that seem insignificant, because those are the moments that define your pattern, and your pattern is what people trust. So the real question is not how impressive you can be in a moment. The real question is how consistent you can be over time. Can people rely on you when it is inconvenient? Can they trust you when there is no pressure forcing you to perform? Can they expect the same standard from you regardless of the situation? Because that is what creates respect. Not intensity, but consistency. Not performance, but reliability. And once you understand that, you stop trying to impress, and you start focusing on something far more powerful, becoming someone others never have to question. That is what makes people believe in you without needing constant reassurance. Because real trust does not need to be repeated, it is felt. At Stoicism Breath, this is where reliability becomes something deeper than just keeping promises. It becomes a reflection of how you see yourself. Reliability is directly connected to self-respect. When you keep your word to others, you build trust externally. But when you keep your word to yourself, you build trust internally. And both are equally important. Because the moment you start breaking promises to yourself, something subtle begins to change. You begin to doubt your own discipline. You hesitate more. You question your own decisions. And that internal doubt eventually shows up in how you carry yourself around others. People may not know why, but they can feel it. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on something simple but powerful. It is not enough to know what is right. You have to live it consistently. That is the foundation of reliability. And that is what most people overlook. They think it is about being perfect, never making mistakes, never falling short. But that is not reality. You will make mistakes. You will miss things. You will fall short at times. The difference is not in whether you fail. The difference is in how you respond when you do. When you fall short, acknowledge it quickly. Correct it visibly. Do not hide behind excuses. Do not delay responsibility. Because ownership restores trust faster than defensiveness ever could. Think about it. When someone immediately takes responsibility, you trust them more, not less. Because it shows control. It shows awareness. It shows that they are not running from reality. If you want to be respected, start with something simple. Pay attention to the small promises you make every day. The email you said you would send. The task you said you would complete. The time you said you would show up. These may seem insignificant, but they are not. They are signals. And over time, those signals form a pattern. That pattern becomes your reputation. And your reputation determines how people experience you. In the end, people do not believe what you say about yourself. They believe what your behavior proves. And when your actions consistently match your words, something powerful happens. Trust becomes automatic. It no longer needs to be questioned. And once trust is established, respect follows naturally without effort. Now here is another shift that most people miss. Most people think power comes from speaking more, reacting faster, proving their point in every moment. But real power is much quieter than that. The people who are truly respected are not the ones who dominate the conversation. They are the ones who are not controlled by it. They do not rush to speak. They do not interrupt just to be seen. They do not let the energy of the room dictate how they behave. They stay steady. And that steadiness gives their presence weight. I used to believe that responding quickly meant I was sharp. I thought jumping into conversations, adding my thoughts, and reacting immediately showed confidence. But over time, I noticed something I could not ignore. The more I spoke, the less impact my words had. It felt like I was trying to stay relevant instead of actually being grounded. And then, there were people who said very little, but when they spoke, everything shifted. Not because they were louder, but because they were in control. Marcus Aurelius lived in a world full of pressure, conflict, and constant noise. Yet he reminded himself of one principle again and again. You have power over your mind, not outside events. That means no matter what is happening around you, your reaction is still your responsibility. And this is where most people lose their strength. Not in what they say, but in how quickly they react. Think about the last time you felt challenged or interrupted. Your instinct was likely to respond immediately, to defend your position, to make sure you were understood. But in that moment speed becomes a weakness. Because the faster you react, the more you reveal that something inside you is unsettled. Your tone shifts. Your words lose precision. And people begin to focus on your emotion instead of your message. Now imagine the opposite. Someone is questioned. Instead of reacting, they pause. They listen fully. They take a moment before speaking. And when they respond, their words are calm, direct, and measured. There is no urgency in their voice. No need to prove anything. And because of that, their words carry weight. People listen differently. Not because they have to, but because they can feel the control behind the words. That is what real presence looks like. Not reacting, but choosing how to respond. There was a moment, I remember clearly, a simple conversation that slowly turned into tension, voices rising, people interrupting each other, everyone trying to be heard but no one truly listening. And in the middle of that noise, something unexpected happened. One person did nothing, no reaction, no interruption, just stillness, just observation. And after a few minutes, they spoke one sentence, calm, direct, and precise. And suddenly the entire room shifted, not because the idea was complex, but because it removed everything unnecessary and revealed what actually mattered. At Stoicism Breath, this is the difference. You need to understand the difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is automatic, it is emotional, it is fast and uncontrolled, it comes from impulse, from pressure, from the need to defend yourself. But response is different. Response is intentional, it is slower, it is grounded, and it is chosen, and people can feel the difference instantly even if they cannot explain it. Marcus Aurelius never tried to control the chaos around him, he trained himself to remain steady within it. And that is real discipline. Because the truth is, you cannot control how others behave, you cannot control the environment, you cannot control what people say or do, but you can always control how you show up in that moment, and that control creates something rare: emotional stability. Most people are uncomfortable with silence, they feel the need to fill it, to speak quickly, to prove they belong, but silence is not empty, it is space. And if you can stay calm in that space, you send a powerful signal. You are not reacting to the moment, you are choosing how to engage with it, and that choice changes everything. You can see it not just in words, but in presence, the way someone moves, the way they hold eye contact, the pace of their speech. When someone rushes, everything feels unstable, their energy is scattered. But when someone slows down, when their voice is steady, when they allow space between their words, something shifts, they appear grounded, and that grounded presence changes how others respond to them. Calm presence does not mean you feel nothing, it means you are not controlled by what you feel. You may experience pressure, frustration, or disagreement, but you do not let those emotions decide your behavior. You notice them, you acknowledge them, and then you choose your response. And in a world where most people react without thinking, that kind of stillness becomes an advantage. It is not weakness, it is control. And when people sense that you are not easily shaken, that your state does not depend on what is happening around you, they begin to trust you. And that is where respect begins to form. Respect is not built by saying more, it is built by needing to prove less. And this is where many people lose it, not because they are wrong, but because they are not honest when it matters. Not loud honesty, not aggressive honesty, but quiet, controlled truth, the kind that is difficult to say, the kind that creates tension in the moment, but clarity in the long term. Most people choose comfort over truth, they choose agreement over clarity, and without realizing it, they slowly reduce the weight of their own words, because every time you avoid truth, you signal uncertainty, you signal hesitation, and over time people stop relying on your judgment. I used to believe that being agreeable was a strength. I thought if I kept things smooth, avoided conflict, and adjusted my words to fit the room, people would respect me. And they did like me, they did listen to me, but they did not trust my decisions, they did not depend on my perspective when it truly mattered. And that is when I realized something uncomfortable. By avoiding discomfort, I was also avoiding responsibility. Marcus Aurelius did not write to please others, he wrote to confront himself, because truth is not something you perform, it is something you align with, and alignment requires courage. Because truth often creates friction, it challenges what people are comfortable with, it forces them to reconsider what they believe. That is why people avoid it, not because they do not see it, but because they do not want to carry the tension that comes with saying it. So ask yourself, how often do you hold something back? How often do you see something clearly but choose silence to avoid discomfort? How often do you soften your words until they lose meaning just to keep things easy? Because every time you do that, you are not protecting the situation, you are stepping away from your own clarity. And over time, that distance becomes visible not just to you, but to everyone around you. There are moments you recognize something is wrong, you see the gap, you feel the misalignment, you know exactly what should be said, but instead you stay quiet, or you soften your words until they lose their meaning, or you wait for someone else to speak first. And in that moment it feels like you are protecting the situation, keeping things smooth, avoiding tension, but the truth is you are protecting yourself, and every time you do that you send a signal, a quiet message that says this is not someone who will speak when it matters. At Stoicism Breath, this is where most people lose respect without realizing it, not in big dramatic failures, but in these small repeated decisions to avoid truth, because the cost is not immediate, but it accumulates over time. When you consistently avoid honesty, people stop looking to you for clarity. They may still include you, they may still appreciate your presence, but they will not depend on your judgment, because respect is not built on comfort, it is built on trust, and trust requires honesty. But understand this clearly: speaking the truth does not mean being harsh, it does not mean being aggressive or insensitive. That is not strength, that is lack of control. Real authority comes from precision, from saying exactly what needs to be said, without letting emotion distort it. You stay calm, you stay clear, and you focus on what actually moves things forward. I remember a situation where a team was preparing for a major decision. Everything looked aligned on the surface, everyone agreed, everything seemed smooth, but there was something off, and you could feel it. Most people noticed it, but no one wanted to disrupt the momentum, no one wanted to be the one who created tension. And then one person spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. They pointed out the one issue everyone else was avoiding. The room became tense for a moment, but that tension created awareness, and that awareness prevented a mistake that would have cost far more later. That is what truth does. It creates short-term discomfort, but long-term stability. And over time, people begin to associate you with that stability. They may not always like what you say, but they will trust that when you speak it matters. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to act according to what is right, not what is easy. And this is where that principle becomes real, because it is always easier to agree, easier to stay silent, easier to avoid difficult conversations. But every time you choose that path, you pay a hidden cost. You lose alignment with yourself. And when that alignment weakens, your words begin to feel lighter, less grounded, less certain. The shift is not about speaking more, it is about speaking with intention. When you see something that needs to be said, do not rush, do not react, but do not avoid it either. Take a moment, organize your thoughts, and deliver it clearly, without extra words, without unnecessary emotion, without trying to control how it will be received. Because respect grows in that space. It grows when people know you will not hide from what is true. It grows when your words reflect clarity instead of avoidance. And it grows when you are willing to carry the discomfort of honesty, so that others do not have to deal with the consequences of silence. And this leads to a deeper realization: being liked and being respected are not the same thing. You can be liked for being agreeable, for being easy, for never challenging anyone, but those same qualities can quietly remove the weight from your presence, because the moment your behavior is driven by the need to be accepted, you are no longer acting from your own standards, you are adjusting yourself to fit someone else's expectations. I used to believe that if people liked me, everything else would follow, so I made sure I was easy to deal with. I avoided conflict, I softened my opinions, I said yes more than I should have, and on the surface, it worked. Conversations were smooth, people were friendly, everything felt comfortable. But when decisions mattered, I was not the one people turned to. When direction was needed, my voice carried less weight, and slowly, I had to face the truth: I had traded respect for approval. Marcus Aurelius never built his life around being liked, because he understood something most people ignore: approval is unstable, it changes with opinion, with mood, with circumstance. And if you depend on it, your behavior becomes unstable as well. One moment, you are confident, the next moment, you are adjusting, trying to maintain something that was never fully yours. So the question becomes simple: are you choosing comfort, or are you choosing clarity? Because in the end, people will not respect you because you always agree with them. They will respect you, because when it matters you are willing to stand in truth even when it is uncomfortable, even when it creates tension, even when it would be easier to stay silent. One moment you feel confident and certain, and the next moment you find yourself adjusting, softening your words, changing your tone, trying to maintain an image that was never fully yours to begin with. And without realizing it, you call that control, but it is not control, it is dependence. At Stoicism Breath, this is the subtle trap most people live in every day. You hesitate not because you lack clarity, but because you are calculating how your truth will be received. You adjust your position, not to express yourself better, but to protect yourself from rejection. And in those moments, you are not choosing your actions, you are negotiating your acceptance. And people can feel that even if they never say it directly, they sense when your decisions are influenced by the need to be liked. And the more you operate from that place, the more unstable your identity becomes, because approval is a moving target. There will always be someone who disagrees, someone who expects something different, someone who is not satisfied. And if your sense of self depends on meeting those expectations, you will never feel grounded. You will constantly shift, constantly adapt, constantly lose a little more of your own clarity in the process. And that is exhausting, not because life is hard, but because you are trying to hold on to something that keeps changing. Respect works differently. It does not come from trying to meet every expectation. It comes from having your own, from being consistent with what you believe, even when it creates discomfort, not unnecessary conflict, but honest alignment. You are not trying to oppose others. You are simply no longer abandoning yourself to maintain approval. I remember a moment where I had to make a decision that I knew would not be popular. It would have been easier to adjust, to soften it, to delay it until it felt more acceptable. But I also knew that doing so would compromise something important. So I made the decision clearly, without over-explaining, without trying to convince everyone. The reactions were mixed. Some agreed, some did not, but something shifted. The same people who questioned the decision still respected it, because it was clear that it came from conviction, not pressure. That is the difference. When your actions are driven by approval, people may like you, but they will not rely on you. When your actions are driven by self-respect, people may not always agree, but they will trust that you are grounded, and that trust is what creates real respect. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He reminded himself to act according to reason, not to be carried by the opinions of others, because those opinions are outside your control, but how you show up is not. And that is the shift you need to make. Stop trying to control how people see you, and start controlling how you present yourself in every moment. This does not mean becoming rigid or distant. It means becoming clear about what you stand for, and what you are willing to compromise, clear about what matters, and what does not, and most importantly, being at peace with the fact that not everyone will agree with you. Because the moment you stop needing approval from everyone, you gain something far more valuable. You gain control. Self-respect is not loud. It does not need to be announced. It shows up quietly in your decisions, in what you say yes to, in what you refuse, in how you carry yourself when there is pressure to conform. And over time, those small decisions begin to form a pattern, and that pattern becomes your identity. So in the end, the choice is simple, but not easy. You can be liked by constantly adjusting yourself to fit every situation, or you can be respected by staying aligned with who you are. You cannot fully have both. And the moment you understand that, your behavior begins to change, not because you are trying to impress anyone, but because you are no longer willing to trade your clarity for approval. And everything eventually comes down to two things: what you allow, and what you take responsibility for. You can speak clearly, stay calm, tell the truth, and still lose respect if you do not protect your boundaries, or if you avoid ownership when things go wrong, because people are not only listening to what you say, they are watching what you tolerate, and how you respond under pressure. Most people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are about being strict or distant, but boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about being clear on where you stand. And once you become clear, everything else begins to follow. Boundaries are not something you announce, they are something you demonstrate. And that is where most people misunderstand them. They think boundaries are about saying the right words at the right time, but in reality, boundaries are revealed through your behavior in the quiet, everyday moments, when no one is paying attention. At Stoicism Breath, this is where your real position is defined. Every time you say yes, When you should say no every time you accept something that does not align with your standards, you are not keeping the peace, you are lowering your position. And the dangerous part is that this does not happen once, it happens repeatedly in small moments that feel insignificant at the time, but slowly they shape how others treat you. I used to believe that saying yes made me more valuable. I thought being flexible, always available, always accommodating would show commitment, and at first it worked. People appreciated it, they relied on it, they praised it, but over time something changed. That appreciation turned into expectation, that expectation turned into pressure, and the same behavior that once made me valued started to make me predictable, and eventually replaceable. And that is when I realized something uncomfortable. I was not being respected for my willingness, I was being used to. Marcus Aurelius understood a principle that most people overlook: you cannot control how others behave, but you can always control what you expect, and that is the core of boundaries, not controlling others, but defining your own standards. Because if you do not define them clearly, the world will define you for them, and once it happens, you find your inner peace, and your attention no longer belongs to you. They are shaped by other people's priorities instead of your own. Think about the moment when you feel drained after a conversation, or after agreeing to something you did not truly want to do. That feeling is not random, it is a signal. It is your mind telling you that you crossed your own boundary. And every time you ignore that signal, you weaken your self-respect, not all at once, but slowly, until you start to feel like your time is no longer fully yours. But boundaries alone are not enough, because even if you protect your standards, mistakes will still happen. You will fall short, you will miss things, you will make wrong decisions. And in those moments, your response matters more than the mistake itself. Most people instinctively try to explain. They point to circumstances, they mention other people, they highlight what was outside their control, not because they want to avoid responsibility, but because they want to protect their image. But the result is the opposite, because the more you explain, the more distance you create. Distance from the problem, distance from responsibility, distance from the outcome. And people are not looking for distance, they are looking for reliability. I remember a moment when I made a mistake that affected more than just my own work. It would have been easy to explain, to justify, to spread the responsibility, but instead, I did something different. I acknowledged it directly. I stated what went wrong. I took responsibility, and I focused on what needed to be done next. And the reaction was not frustration, it was trust. Because ownership sends a clear signal: this is someone who can be relied on even when things go wrong. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself not to waste time blaming others or external conditions, not because those factors do not exist, but because they do not change what needs to be done. The only thing that matters is your response. And that is where your control lives, that is where your value is built. When you combine strong boundaries with full ownership, something shifts. You are no longer someone who adjusts to everything or avoids responsibility. You become someone who is clear about what you accept and accountable for what you do. And that combination is rare, and because it is rare, it stands out. People begin to understand something about you. They cannot easily push you, but they can trust you completely. You are not rigid, but you are not negotiable on what matters. You are not perfect, but you are consistent in how you handle imperfection. And that consistency creates a different kind of respect, not based on impression, but based on certainty. In the end, your value is not defined by what you say about yourself. It is defined by what you allow and what you take responsibility for, because those two things reveal your standards, and your standards define everything else.